So hello everyone to the Bay in Portugal, and my name is Pil Pedersen, as just announced. Thank you so much for inviting me to this mini symposium. I'm an assistant professor at Aarhus University, and I'm educated as a biologist, and I've been working with biodiversity for the last 10-15 years. I'm based at Aarhus University in a center called Sustainable Landscapes Sustainable Landscapes under Global Change. I have also been associated as a researcher to the Danish Biodiversity Council, who have given advice to the Danish government on biodiversity. Here I will talk about actions for biodiversity and climate resilience in urban environments. And I should say that I'm affiliated also with the Biodiverse Cities project, which is also an Interact project as the GreenGap project. And I will, of course, try to give some of the insights that we have provided into that project here, as I think that is the main reason why I'm invited to hold this speech. So let's get started. So a little bit about the context of the Biodiverse Cities project, which is running these years, have already done so for 2.5 years, and will run until the end of next year. So basically, Biodiverse Cities is about accelerating biodiversity in cities across the North Sea region, and doing that by implementing nature-based solutions that will hopefully both hold biodiversity in these cities, hold biodiversity laws in these cities, but also support ecosystem services and general benefit people as well. Basically, this Biodiverse Cities project is addressing 3 challenges, as you can see here on the slide. It's addressing NBS challenge on biodiversity, one on a social challenge and a governance challenge. And the NBS challenge is basically about how we can best implement high quality green biodiversity. And the social challenge is about how we actually get people involved and so that they benefit from nature. And the last part is about how to mainstream, upscale whatever we find in this project into the larger context in the city processes and also beyond the project. And as you can also see on this slide, we have quite a lot of cities involved. We have 9 cities involved. Not all of them are shown here. Only the main cities are shown on this slide. And we are covering 8 countries in the North Sea region. Just to give you a little bit of idea about the type of projects, because they really vary a lot. So generally the context are urban, but that also varies. Some are very much in the city center. Some of them are more to the rural side. As you can, for example, see in Dordrecht, they are working on different projects. One that is a greening project of a city park together with the citizens, and one where they want to also increase biodiversity while doing sewage restoration. Bremen is working on increasing the connectivity through green corridors and also greening of a very grey industrial area, as you can see here in the picture. And then Växjö in Sweden, they work on also different projects, but one of them is on restoring a recreative wetland, and also together with, or co-creating it together with citizens. Then Lille in France are working on greening social housing areas. And lastly, Aarhus in Denmark, where I'm based, is also trying to increase connectivity, but also actually buying up land to make a green ring south of Aarhus, which is more to the rural side. So as you can see, it covers the Biodiverse Cities project cover quite a lot of the North Sea region. And just to give you a little context, we have 5 main city pilots, where each of these cities have 2 pilot sites where they are going to implement nature-based solutions. Then we have 4 pollinator cities that are basically taking up whatever good advices or ideas they can pick up from the pilot cities and then bring them home and implement in their own cities. And in addition to that, we are knowledge partners from different universities and impact partners and local support partners as well. So that's just to give you a little bit of context here. And then a little bit more in detail on the work packages. Not that I'm going to talk more than just giving the outline here or the overview, but work package 1, which I'm the work package leader of, is basically about giving advice as a knowledge partner from a university to these different cities on how they design the nature-based solution to increase biodiversity, how they implement it, and how we can then also assess these nature-based solutions in terms of the effect of biodiversity. And the 2 other work packages are about enhancing citizens' relationship with acceptance and nature of biodiversity, and is led by University of Bremen, as well as one of the impact partners from the Netherlands. And then work package 3 is led by Aarhus University, and I'm not talking too much about the work package 3, but so now you have a little bit of context here, and perhaps there can be a little bit of exchange later along the lines between these 2 Interreg projects. You're definitely very welcome to reach out. But generally, I'm talking about actions towards increasing biodiversity, and just to say that, of course, I cannot cover all of the actions towards biodiversity today. So because there's so many things you can do. But to give you a little bit of an overview, this is from a study, actually from Australia, by Zoans and colleagues from 2023. And here you can get an idea of what sort of actions are going on in urban environments to increase biodiversity. And as you can see here, and I hope it works that I can show it with my arrow. So the number here indicates how many of the 318 actions in Australian cities that can be attributed to these different categories. And you can see a lot of the actions are about coordination and outreach, also quite a lot on data and publication. And then some of the actions are also on ground in terms of changing things, physical changes, namely adding structures. And then there are also greening, some restoration, and managing threats. So as you can see, actions can be a lot of things, but I have chosen to actually really focus on some really broad level here, and in much contrast to Conrad, who have just talked on case studies, I'm taking a higher overview or perspective on this. So I'm going through some of the important ecological principles for doing actions instead of picking down in specific cases. Actions for biodiversity that are targeted natural systems, so not necessarily resilient for human systems, though they often go hand in hand, right? So these are also some of the advices we have given to the partners in the Biodiverse Cities project. So basically what we have said to the city partners here is that there are 3 things that they should try to remember and focus on when they do actions for biodiversity in their cities. And that is focus on time, focus on space, and focus on quality. And for all of these, they should try to increase it. So long-lasting efforts, as much area as possible, and higher quality as possible. And I'll dig into the 3 aspects here, or elements. So the first one is time. And basically, this is a very simple message about how important it is that whatever actions are done, they are not working only on the short term, but on the long term. And that can be ensured through different measures, but one of them is, of course, protection, illustrated here. And that can be protection through policies or laws, but it can also just be de facto protection. But basically, to increase biodiversity, actions need to be long-lasting. and pop-up nature is not really benefiting biodiversity in the long term. Then the next concept or important message is to increase space. And that is basically founded on a very basic principle in ecology that we see a pattern that is very strong in ecology, and that's the species-area relationship. So as you can see here on the graph, a power relationship between species number or richness and the area. So basically, the larger area we have, the more species can fit into the area. And I'll go into more detail with that. But basically, it's a question about providing as many niches as possible. So this is it's not a law, but it's nearly as the closest what we get to a law in ecology. And then we have quality. And quality, what we mean with that is in terms of actions on a local scale, that has to do with trying to increase heterogeneity as much as possible, both in terms of abiotic factors like water, light, nutrients, and so on, and in biotic factors. So that has to do with competition, predators, symbiosis, and so on. And also both heterogeneity in space, but also in time. So also thinking about what resources are there through the different seasons in a year. And examples of increasing heterogeneity can cover, for example, different sorts of substrates, organic soil, stones, different sorts of plant species, for example, vegetation structure, as also Conrad showed that vegetation structure is important, and having different sorts of structures, short grass, longer grass, shrubbery, trees, young trees, older trees, and so on. And also just having different habitats, so some with some forested or tree covered, some more open, some with water, and so on. And also with quality, we also mean use native species, because basically they provide more, or they fit better into the system. I'll come more into that in a minute. And in terms of actions beyond the local scale, we recommend cities to think about increasing the functional connectivity. So you're not necessarily able to create a physical green corridor, but maybe you can think about providing stepping stones for the species as illustrated on this figure down in the lowest part of the slide. And just a comment to the upper graph, as you can see here, it's the species-area relationship again, but here with two different curves showing that a homogeneous habitat or ecosystem have a generally lower number of species than a heterogeneous habitat or ecosystem. Yeah. So why heterogeneity? And that links to the second part of the title about resilience. So basically, if you increase the amount of different substrates, you create more niches. And here that is illustrated nicely with one of Jeroen Helmer's nice illustrations from ArkNature in the Netherlands. So all credits goes to Jeroen Helmer and ArkNature. But basically, as you can see, that means that if there are more variation in the ecosystem, you make more niches, and the more niches you make, more species can fit in. And when you have more species in the system, you are likely to have a more intact food web. And a more intact food web or ecosystem is more resilient than a degraded one. So that's why heterogeneous ecosystems are better. And then you could ask the same question about why native species, for example, native plant species. But basically, it's about that going to the basics of it. Native species are adapted, they're co-evolved, co-developed together with the rest of the ecosystem, so they just fit in better. They are more likely to last longer and to cope well in the system. They are also better at providing habitat and food for the rest of the ecosystem, the rest of the food web. And with that, you again are likely to obtain a more intact ecosystem, more intact food web, and more resilient food web. And there's a little graphic here just to illustrate the point that nativeness generally improves biodiversity. So the overall theme of this symposium is importance of improving biodiversity in urban areas. And there's always an ongoing discussion about how important is it to do efforts in cities. And that has to do with urban areas really not taking up a lot of space in Europe, for example. So here cities take up, or depending on how you define it, but if you define it as like more than 50% of the population live in an urban center, then there's only 3.5% of EU that is cities, right? So that means it's not really where we do the majority of efforts in terms of biodiversity for the whole world, not directly at least, but perhaps indirectly. And that's the second point here on the slide, that because cities have such a disproportionately large amount of the population in EU and across the world, then that means that there's also a disproportionately large potential to actually educate urban dwellers, people in the cityscape, on biodiversity and make them aware of the positive effects. We have done that, or tried to increase actions with a particular focus on especially that in the Biodiverse Cities project by using citizen science. And I'll just give you a little bit of information about how we do that and why we do that. So basically, using citizen science makes a lot of sense in Biodiverse Cities project, because we have the work package 2, which is basically about enhancing citizens' relationship with nature and the benefits for people in cities. So the link between increasing biodiversity and doing it together with people makes a lot of sense. And we are linking or using citizen science when we need to monitor the effects of in nature-based solutions on biodiversity. So it enables citizen science can enable anyone with no formal scientific credentials beforehand to engage in these efforts in terms of monitoring biodiversity. It can include a lot of different activities, analyzing scientific data, sharing information, mapping and co-creation. And in our case, it's the focus on monitoring. And as you can see here on the top in the image, that's from the Biodiverse City project, where citizens are actually monitoring the green stuff in their close or nearby environment. And also a highlight, or something to highlight, is that the technological development in terms of apps and helping tools to identify species is also a good reason to use citizen science. But basically, we have actually developed a pilot tool, meaning that it's not, a perfect tool yet, but a tool that is under development, but a tool where cities can take up this tool and use it together with citizens to monitor biodiversity of these implemented nature-based solutions. So we have created a citizen science toolkit under the name Urban Bioscope. And the idea is to share that beyond the partnership towards the end of the project. But basically, the reason why we created this tool is that we have a hard time finding appropriate tools out in the greater toolbox to actually make us able to monitor the biodiversity across these very, very different nature-based solutions, going from greening of front yards in the Netherlands to large rural areas being converted from farmland into protected areas, and restoring wetlands and so on. So we have tried to create a framework that can measure the biodiversity potential, but by the help of citizens. So the idea here, and we cannot go into detail, but basically there's a lot of elements, as you can see here in the framework, that are important for biodiversity potential. And you score 1 point if you have one of these elements, ecological elements. That could be a pond in the garden, or it could be a large tree. So that was just a little short intro into that. And then I put in some slides on citizen science, and I'm not going through them, but it's meant as a resource afterwards that people can look into if the slides are shared. So a little bit on advantages and disadvantages on citizen science, and a little bit about the tools that are available. And there are many more, and maybe there are even better ones locally where you are. But I also wanted to cover a little bit about the importance of improving biodiversity for not only the natural systems, as I have done now, but also for the human systems. And I will do that in terms of climate adaptation. And I just have a little bit of time, so it's just 2 slides, and then I'll sum up. Urban heat island effects are a phenomenon that we know from cities, and it's increasingly becoming a problem because heat waves are likely to happen more and more in the future, as you can see in the upper left corner. And that will particularly hit the cities, and that's where a lot of people are. So we're likely to see more risks of death in the future. And just to illustrate what urban heat island effect is, I had inserted this little map from New York, where you can see where are the green areas, for example, here. And those are also the ones that are cooler. And basically the phenomenon says that cities are generally covered with their densely built infrastructure, roads and so on, meaning that absorbs a lot with the heat, while also having very little natural vegetation and little water, meaning basically that more heat are kept in the cities than compared to the surroundings. But we also see that green urban areas can actually make up for that to some extent, because some studies have found, for example, this one in the upper right corner, Miranda et al. From 2022, that if you increase the tree cover at least with 16%, then you can actually get a drop in temperature with 1 degrees. So green can really reduce these urban island effects or cool the cities. And another example of climate adaptation from actions towards biodiversity, likely a little bit outside the cities, but that can have big consequences inside the cities, are to basically restore rivers. And here's an example from natural flood management in the Netherlands. They have done that a lot. And as you can see here from the reference from Jepsen et al. From 2018, they found that basically restoring the river means that they have reduced the risk of flood risk to the cities downstream. So not only are there potentially positive effects for the natural system, but also to the human system. And just to sum up on all of this, in terms of the importance of improving biodiversity in urban areas. So the first part on natural environments, I mentioned some important principles. So focus on increasing the permanence, time, long-lasting efforts, increasing space if possible. And if you cannot increase space, you hopefully can increase the quality, improve heterogeneity, use native species, improve the connectivity to areas outside the local scale. And think about that cities have a disproportionately large potential to educate citizens in cities in terms of biodiversity and the effects of green spaces. And that can be done through citizen science, as we do in biodiverse cities. And then lastly, I mentioned just a few of the benefits for the human systems in terms of climate adaptation, namely reduction in heat island effect and reduced risk of flooding. And with that, I think I have taken too much time. Sorry about that, but thank you for listening in.